Hi, it's Gene, and welcome to podcast number 6 for Clean in 17. The next few days, we're going to be doing a series called Lessons from Leprosy. So this is part 1, and we're going to talk about Miriam. The scripture, if you want to open your Bibles, is Numbers chapter 12. So first, who was Miriam? Well, first of all, she was Moses' big sis. If you remember in Exodus chapter 2, she went with Moses' mom, and together they put Moses down into the papyrus basket. And she hung around to talk to Pharaoh's daughter. She was the one who, as you see there, masterminded the idea to have their mom nurse Moses. So she actually looked after her little brother and in quite short order reunited him with mom. So this young girl cared deeply for her little brother from birth. She was also a leader of women and a prophet to the Israelites. Reference Exodus 15. She was actually a prophetess, a prophet. God spoke to her in one way or another to be a prophet. Okay, well, who was Aaron? Well, that's Moses' older brother. Aaron was 3 years older than Moses. Moses and his brother and sister were descendants of Levi. That's the tribe that were the priests of Israel. And after the Exodus, Aaron, being a Levite, Aaron and his sons were chosen to lead the new Levitical priesthood and offer sacrifices on behalf of Israel. That's, as you can see in Exodus 28. He was spoken to by God. I put to great Moses. It's actually to greet Moses upon his return to Egypt. God actually, in some way, spoke to Aaron and told him, go out and greet Moses. He's returning to Egypt. Exodus 4:27. Aaron was he was a communicator of God's commands to Israel, as Moses was afraid to speak. He thought of himself as not eloquent of speech. Exodus 4, Exodus 6. Moses was also a prophet, as was Miriam. Reference Exodus 7:1. He worked side by side with his younger brother Moses to pass God's message on to Pharaoh to release the Israelites. All throughout Exodus, he performed God's wonders and put the plagues into effect alongside Moses. So he was Moses' big brother by 3 years. You can read that in Exodus 7:7. The age difference. Prophet, a miracle worker, a priest, Moses' partner. They worked side by side in the Lord's work. He was also God's messenger to the Israelites and to Pharaoh. Well, who was Moses' wife? Zipporah was one of the 7 daughters of Reuel, also called Jethro. And he was given to Moses in marriage after Moses chased off the shepherds who were bothering Reuel's 7 daughters as they were drawing water for their sheep. And Zipporah became Moses' wife, and she was the mother of his 2 sons, Gershom and Eleazar. And she also went with Moses, left her land, went down into Egypt as a foreigner, side by side with her husband, to support him to carry out his mission to lead the Israelites out of slavery. She was a woman who had conviction about God's plan. If you read in Exodus 4:24 through 26, she circumcised Gershom, Moses' son, There's a really curious passage there. It said God was about to kill him, and it was quite likely they were referring to Gershom, his son, although it's sort of the him. Is it referring to Moses or Gershom? But either way, she said, "You haven't circumcised this son." So she did it, and apparently spared probably Gershom's life. You think about it, at this time, we don't remember that circumcision had been around for about 500 years, going back to Abraham. And it's thought, if you, in the Midrash, that's the rabbinical writings, commentary on the Old Testament written by rabbis, the Midianites, they were believed by these rabbinical commentators that they were nomadic, they were idol worshippers, and they were known for leading Israelites astray. So they speculate Moses might not have circumcised Gershom because Reuel was a Midianite priest. They were idol worshippers, and he might not have allowed that, or Moses might have compromised in some way. So God was showing, look, he needs to be consecrated to me. And so Zipporah had the conviction to follow God's plan, and she circumcised Gershom where Moses had not. That speaks a lot to the character of Zipporah, and it's going to come into play soon. There's something a little different and unsettling about her, as we'll read in Numbers chapter 12, at least in the eyes of Miriam and Aaron, something unsettling about her. The rabbinic literature suggests that from the language they used, that she was unusually beautiful and even well into her later years. And they say her name meant gaze and see how comely she is, meaning just look at her, see how beautiful she is. So that's one thing that is believed about her. She was called a Cushite. In the Septuagint translation, she's called an Ethiopian. This does not mean necessarily modern-day Ethiopia. In the Septuagint, it was written by people in Greek writers, and Ethiopia was often a catch-all term for all the areas to the south, stretching basically from Africa all the way to India. And that term Ethiopians even carried all the way up into the 17th century AD, meaning that the people from the south. And yes, they were people of darker complexion. Like, as you see, some people from India have a very dark complexion. People from Saudi Arabia, south of Egypt, the Sudan. So she was, forgive the term I put there, possibly Afro-Asiatic. She was, although she descended from Abraham, she was descended from Abraham and his wife, or also listed as concubine Keturah. There were 5 centuries between the birth of Midian, the father of the Midianites, and when Zipporah came around, and these nomadic peoples were called Cushites, and the rabbinic literature suggests that they were dark-skinned people. Now, one more thing there at the bottom. Just as Moses was an alien in the land of Midian when this was after he fled Egypt, and he met Jethro and worked for him, Zipporah had become a foreigner also, and so she was considered a foreigner in the eyes and the minds of the Israelites. So she experienced the same idea of being the same feeling of being an outsider that Moses had. I just put together a quick little table of Moses' life. You look in the right-hand column, you can look at 3 40-year periods of his life. The first 40 years he lived in Egypt. Again, his mother raised him up. He was uh, became the Prince of Egypt from that young age up until he was 40 years old, and when he flees to Midian. Now he spends the next 40 years with Jethro and his family and his wife Zipporah. So probably in his early 40s he married Zipporah. So from age 40 to 80, the middle third of his life, he's in Midian. And he's known in Midian as an Egyptian, probably because of the way he dressed. And then he spends the last 40 years, the first year or so, leading the Israelites out into crossing the Red Sea, and then wandering in the desert, leading them to the Promised Land. And remember, they went on ahead of him, and he died at the age of 120. It was pretty amazing. So let's read Numbers chapter 12. Miriam and Aaron began to talk against Moses because of his Cushite wife, for he had married a Cushite. Has the Lord spoken only through Moses, they asked? Hasn't he also spoken through us? And the Lord heard this. And Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. That verse there has always just blown my mind. At once the Lord said to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, come out to the tent of meeting, all three of you. How'd you like to be Aaron and Miriam right then? So the three of them went out. Verse 5, then the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud. He stood at the entrance to the tent and summoned Aaron and Miriam. When the two of them stepped forward, he said, listen to my words. When there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, reveal myself to them in visions. I speak to them in dreams. But this is not true of my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak face to face, clearly, and not in riddles. He sees the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? So verse 9, the anger of the Lord burned against them, and he left them. When the cloud lifted from above the tent, Miriam's skin was leprous. It became as white as snow. Aaron turned toward her and saw that she had a defiling skin disease. And he said to Moses, please, my Lord, small l, I ask you not to hold against us the sin we have so foolishly committed. Do not let her be like a stillborn infant coming from its mother's womb with its flesh half eaten away. So Moses cried out to the Lord, please, God, heal her. The Lord replied to Moses, if her father had spit in her face, will she not have been in disgrace for 7 days? Confine her outside the camp for 7 days. After that, she can be brought back. So Miriam was confined outside the camp for 7 days. And the people did not move on till she was brought back. After that, the people left Hazeroth and encamped in the desert of Paran. Okay, let's look at the problems. First of all, Miriam and Aaron were ungrateful. That's the first problem. They were reunited with their long-lost little brother, whom God used to lead them out of slavery. And then they pick up on the griping of the other Israelites. The Israelites finally make it out of Egypt. They cross the Red Sea. The Egyptian army is swallowed up behind them. Next thing you know, we read Numbers chapter 11. They're complaining about the manna, and they want meat. And God does give them quail, but he is not happy with their lack of gratitude. That's Numbers chapter 11. And here we are right away, Numbers chapter 12. Miriam and Aaron catch the disease of ingratitude, and they're griping, just like the other Israelites were. Second problem, there's a prejudice / jealousy going on. They're like, hold on, what's with Moses' wife? One of those people, those Cushites. there was an ethnic difference going on there. And hold on, wait a minute, aren't we prophets? Doesn't God speak through us too? What about us? How come they get the limelight? What about us? It's a First of all, they show displeasure about her ethnicity, and that's something that God abhors, by the way. And then second of all, there's such a jealousy. Aren't we prophets too? You know, hey, remember, Moses isn't the only BMOC. They used to call that the big man on campus. We're prophets. We're smart. We're wise. God uses us too. So what's going on there? This is just jealousy happening when there ought to be a sense of just incredible gratitude. They haven't even been with Moses probably a year yet, and they're in their 80s. They celebrate. If you read, after they cross the Red Sea, Aaron and Miriam are leading the celebrations. They're singing songs, and then maybe a short time goes by, a couple months maybe. People gripe about the food, and all of a sudden, apparently Miriam and Aaron get complacent too, and they start looking around and, wait a minute. What's so special about this Cushite woman? And Moses isn't the only one. We're prophets. Well, guess what? God hears this, believe it or not, when we grumble. Moses wasn't just some royal hotshot. As I put there, his 80 years had apparently humbled him. Apparently more than anyone, if you read, as we read Numbers 12:3. He was a very humble man. There was not a man to be found more humble. So, and secondly, what does Zipporah's ethnicity have to do with it? And by the way, when I speak to Moses, I speak to him face to face, just like one man speaks to another. You want to go after him. He is highly favored in my sight, and that's apparently due to his humility. The repercussions, obviously, God was very angry. Just like he was, if you read Numbers 11, he was very angry with the Israelites for complaining about manna and not having meat. We had fish when we lived by the Red Sea in Egypt, and you took us out here, and so, yeah, all right, here's your quail. I'm going to feed 2 million of you, quail for a whole month, and by the end of it, you're going to be more sick of the quail than you are the manna. I promise you that. Well, he was just as angry at Miriam and Aaron. And the repercussion was that her skin was leprous. What happened to Aaron? He was utterly terrified. He says, Moses, please don't hold this sin against us. We've been foolish. So we see that God confines her outside of the camp for 7 days, and then she could be brought back. And look what effect it had on the whole nation of Israel. The people did not move on till she was brought back. They had to wait that whole 7 days to move forward. So let's review the healing. Moses cries out to God, please, God, heal her. Then the people could leave Hazeroth, and then they moved on and encamped in the desert of Paran. Let's review this. I have a lot here. I can send you this little PowerPoint if you want to go through some of these questions. There were a bunch of reference scriptures there, and some of the other pages. First of all, in view of who God is and all he has done for you and through you, I want us to ask ourselves, is there any ungratefulness that you can identify that you need to purge from your heart in this new year? If you're anything like me, there is. I know my gratitude needs to grow. Something to think about. Secondly, what about our prejudices and our jealousies? By the way, we all have these tendencies. even in different types of prejudices. Um, it's quite often that when someone is quite different than us, we might be a little challenged in our hearts to accept them or to not make an assumption about them. And it's not just race. It's not just race. And brothers and sisters, for heaven's sake, let's not ever uh, have even a hint of racial divide. And the congregation I'm in, I really see that the brothers and sisters of different races love each other deeply. I don't see that problem at all. Let's not even go there. But let's think about what might be there sometimes in our hearts. Age. Boy, that person's young, and they're sharing with me. They're sharing wisdom with me. Boy, they're young. Oh, they're old. They don't understand. They're behind the times. What about cliques? You have the academics and the athletes. We need one another. I put there fashionistas and fighters. This could apply to male or female. There's Ken and Barbie over there, and I'm a guy who hangs out in the woods, and I don't relate to you in appearances. I mean, we literally can form cliques based on appearance. What about other possible jealousies, prejudices? Leaders and non-leaders. That there's church leaders and there's other people, and well, why are we studying this? We really need to be. I don't understand that. It's thinking that you know better, and not. Well, what about being popular? Some people, everybody knows their name, and then there are others who are not as well known. That's just how life is. Fair or unfair, but there could be a divide. Certainly is. There was when I was in high school, that's for sure. Bosses and employees. Sometimes there's that hidden line between bosses and employees, men and women. Let's not have gender biases. And then there's culturally different issues. We have, someone might have moved from another part of the world, and there's a language barrier. You don't know their language, or they're just learning yours, and they have some cultural practices that are different, and you just aren't comfortable around them. And then finally, what about pride? Do you look down on others? Most of us have. I have. Something to think about. Do you have little or no desire for others' advice? Oh, I think I know how this is going to go. This is cool. I can work this one out. And finally, do you conceal your sins and flaws? I know it's not easy to go and say, look, I'm sorry about what I did, or I need to tell someone about what I did. I need you to pray for me because of my sin. We need to purge these things this year. If we do, there's really no reason why we can't move powerfully forward in our families. There at the end, remember what it says in the end of Numbers 12. After that, the people left Hazeroth and encamped in the desert of Paran. Wouldn't it be great if your family, your house church, your local congregation moves forward rather than remain stuck in Hazeroth? Because you and I humbled out and begged God to purge us out of our leprosy. Thanks, brothers and sisters, and I look forward to tomorrow's part 2 of Lessons from Leprosy.